This is the easier-to-read version of 1984 by George Orwell, retold and narrated by Sarah Simpson. Part 3, Chapter 2. The days, or was it weeks or months, Winston couldn't be sure, that followed were worse than anything he could have imagined. He was alone in a small cell except when guards came in to beat him. The lights were always on, so Winston had no idea if it was day or night. He had no idea how much time had gone by. 5 or 6 men in black uniforms would come in. They would kick him with their boots, punch him with their fists, or hit him with metal rods. Every inch of his body was hurt. His head, his arms, his legs, his crotch. His entire body was bloody and bruised. At first he was angry with the guards for beating him, but as they beat him more and more, he became angry with himself for staying conscious. All he wanted to do was pass out so he wouldn't feel the blows. In the beginning, Winston tried to stay strong. He told himself he would tell them nothing. But the beatings were so hard and so painful that he would do anything, say anything, to make the pain stop. He confessed to every crime he could think of, whether he had actually committed the crime or not. He confessed to lying, treason, adultery, stealing, spying. He confessed that he had been a spy for the Brotherhood since 1968, even though he had only been a young child then and had only learned that the Brotherhood existed a few years ago. He confessed that he had been having secret meetings with Goldstein and planning to assassinate Big Brother. This was not true, but he confessed it anyway. He confessed that he had murdered his wife, even though the party had to know that she was still alive. It didn't matter. He would say anything if it made the pain stop even for a few minutes. Through it all, O'Brien was there, just out of sight, telling the men when to hit him and when to stop. Just when Winston was sure he would die, doctors would come. They would listen to his heart and feel his body for broken bones. Sometimes they would give him injections that took away the pain and made him sleep. He loved those injections. There were bowls of hot soup, pieces of bread, and coffee. A barber came to shave his face and head. There was sleep on a small, hard bed. Then more pain. There was always more pain. O'Brien was near, telling the doctors when to give him the injections and when to let the pain go on a little longer. It went on, until finally the beatings started to become less frequent. That was when the party members started to come. They would yell and scream at him for hours, and he would say whatever they wanted him to say, because he was afraid that if he didn't, the beatings would start again. It didn't matter if the crimes he confessed to were real crimes or only crimes he had thought about. In the party's eyes, thoughts and actions were equally bad. Then came the room where they strapped him to a chair. They gave him injections of a medicine that made him feel dreamy and confused, then showed him a telescreen with 2 giant eyes, Big Brother's eyes, that stared into his eyes. He could feel the eyes digging into his brain and pulling out all the secret thoughts he had tried to hide during the beatings. There were bright lights and a doctor in a white coat. O'Brien was always nearby, just out of sight. 2 men came. One of them said, "Room 101. He was strapped to a table with wheels and rolled down a bright hallway. Winston laughed and cried. He imagined Julia and O'Brien and Charrington beside him, and he told them every secret he could think of. Maybe then the men wouldn't hurt him. He had told them everything. There was nothing more to tell them. Winston woke, strapped to a table. He couldn't move at all. Even his head was firmly strapped down. O'Brien was there, and this time Winston could see him. He was leaning down over Winston's face, looking into his eyes. "Don't worry, Winston," O'Brien said. "I've been watching over you for 7 years. I won't give up on you now. Remember how I told you we would meet again in the place where there is no darkness? What I said was true. This is that place. Your mind is very, very sick, and I'm here to help you get better." O'Brien waved his hand, and a jolt of terrible pain shot through Winston's entire body. He tried to get away, but the straps held him down. Winston felt like his spine was going to snap in half. You're afraid, O'Brien said. You're afraid that your spine will snap and all the fluid inside will ooze out until you're dead. I know exactly what you're thinking, Winston. The pain you felt came from an electric current. The strength of the electric shock can be anywhere from 0, no shock, to 100, maximum shock power. I just gave you a shock at a power level of 40. Remember how much it hurts before you answer my questions. I can make it hurt much, much worse. Will you tell me the truth? Winston nodded. He would tell O'Brien anything to avoid feeling the shock again. O'Brien relaxed. That's good, Winston, O'Brien said. All of this is for your own good. None of this is a punishment, no matter what you might think. Everything we are doing here is to help you. Your mind is very, very sick. Up until now, you weren't ready to get well, but you want to get well now, don't you? Winston nodded. Who's Oceania at war with? O'Brien asked. East Asia, Winston said. Oceania was at war with East Asia when I came here. Very good, O'Brien said. And Oceania has always been at war with East Asia, isn't that right? Winston hesitated. Oceania is at war with East Asia now, Winston said, but we were at war with Eurasia just a little while ago. East Asia was our ally. O'Brien waved his hand, and Winston's body was stiffened by the pain of the electric current. That was 50, O'Brien said. We can talk more about East Asia in a little while. Now, I want to talk about a photo you saw at work a few years ago. O'Brien pulled a photo out of his pocket. It was the same photo Winston had seen all those years ago. You thought it was a photo of Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford getting an award, O'Brien said. But everyone knows they are traitors who turned against Big Brother and the party, so that photo couldn't possibly exist, could it, Winston? Winston was looking right at the photo. Obviously, the photo existed. Winston didn't want another electric shock. He knew what he should say to avoid it, but he couldn't do it. The photo exists, Winston cried. O'Brien walked across the room and pushed the photo into the memory hole trash can in the wall. Somewhere in the building, the photo was already burned to ashes. You're wrong, O'Brien said. See? It never existed, did it? But it did exist until a minute ago when you threw it away, Winston said. You can't just say something never existed and make it true. Are you sure? O'Brien asked. The party has a famous saying, I know you know it. Every child learns it in school. Whoever controls the past controls the future. And whoever controls the present controls the past. You remember it, don't you? Yes, Winston said. Don't you trust the party to tell you the truth? O'Brien asked. Winston knew this was a loaded question. He thought about the electric shock. He didn't know how to answer. O'Brien could sense Winston's uncertainty, and he smiled. Don't make things so complicated, O'Brien said. Think about it, Winston. Where does the past exist? In our minds, Winston said. You can burn a photo or change a news article, but the past still exists in our memories. But the party is in charge of the past. That means the party is in charge of your memories. The party will tell you what to remember, O'Brien said. That doesn't make any sense, Winston said. I can't help what I remember. My mind just remembers things. I don't have control over it. O'Brien looked pleased, and Winston relaxed a bit. This is good, O'Brien said. This is a conversation that is honest and productive. The problem with you, Winston, is that you have a sick, lazy mind. You just let your mind think about anything at once. Lazy, undisciplined. You have to train your mind to see the real truth, the party's truth. Only then will you be happy. I read your diary. I read the part about how you think freedom means being able to say that 2 + 2 = 4. But that's not freedom at all. O'Brien held up 4 fingers. How many fingers am I holding up? O'Brien asked. 4, Winston said. Immediately, a jolt of electricity ran painfully through Winston's body. Let's try again, O'Brien said, holding up 4 fingers. How many fingers am I holding up? Remember, I'll know if you're lying. Answer truthfully. How many fingers? 4, Winston said again. 60, O'Brien said. Another agonizing jolt of electricity. "How many?" O'Brien asked. "4! 4, 4, 4!" Winston screamed. "How can it be anything else?" 70, O'Brien said. The electricity shot through him. He was on fire. His spine was going to snap him in half. "What about now?" O'Brien asked, holding up 4 fingers. 5, Winston cried. 5! O'Brien shook his head in disappointment. "You're lying," O'Brien said. "You don't really believe it's 5. You're just telling me what you think I want to hear. 80? The pain was unbearable. Winston could feel his body stiffen. His vision started to go black. He was going to pass out. "How many fingers?" O'Brien said, slapping Winston's cheek and holding up his hand. Winston tried to focus his eyes. Just for a second, he saw 5 fingers. It jumped back to 4 again, but he had seen it. There were 5. 5, Winston said. "I saw 5. I really did." "You're very stubborn, Winston, but I feel like we're finally making progress," O'Brien said. "But how do you know when it's supposed to be 5? I don't mean to see 4, but that's just what I see," Winston said. "You have to let the party remember for you," O'Brien said. "You're only one person. Your memories can be flawed. You can make mistakes. The party is big. The party is eternal. The party cannot make a mistake. Sometimes it will be 3. Sometimes it will be 5. If you let the party tell you which it is, you'll never be wrong again." Winston was sobbing. "Again?" O'Brien said. A shock of pain. "How many fingers?" O'Brien asked. 5, I think. 5, Winston said. "You need to know it's 5. In your heart it needs to be 5, O'Brien said. Again, 80. Unbearable pain. "How many fingers?" O'Brien asked. "I want to see 5, Winston sobbed. The electricity flowed through his body, burning him from the inside. "How many fingers?" O'Brien asked. "I don't know," Winston cried. "I don't know how many. Just don't hurt me again. If you shock me again, it will kill me. I truly, honestly do not know." "That's better," O'Brien said. He nodded to a doctor standing nearby. "He can have pain medication now." The doctor came over to Winston and stuck a needle into his arm. As soon as the medicine entered his bloodstream, Winston felt wonderful. He felt better than he'd ever felt in his entire life. He looked at O'Brien, and all he felt was peace. O'Brien knew him. He understood him. That was all that mattered. Love didn't matter. Julia didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the peace he felt right now. "Why are we doing this to you?" O'Brien asked. "To get me to confess," Winston said. "Try again," O'Brien said. "To punish me?" Winston said. "No," O'Brien said. "We are doing this to help you. Right now your mind is sick. It is important to the party that your mind is healthy. Big Brother doesn't care about all the bad things you did in the past. Those things don't matter. What matters is your mind and what goes on inside your mind when you think nobody else knows. We don't just want to destroy our enemies. We want to change them." Winston looked into O'Brien's face. O'Brien was a true believer in the party. He truly believed everything he was saying. "Do you know what a martyr is, Winston?" O'Brien asked. "No," Winston said. "What's a martyr?" "A martyr is a person who is killed for what they believe in. All the other people who believe in the same thing as the dead person remember that person as a hero. It makes everyone still left alive believe in their cause even more. It used to happen with religions a long time ago." "I think I understand," Winston said uncertainly. "The party doesn't allow martyrs," O'Brien said. "We learned that in the early days after the revolution. Whenever there was a rebellion, we'd kill the rebellion's leader. All the people still alive would worship that dead man like he was a god. It just led to more rebellions. For the good of Oceania, we had to stop that. We couldn't keep having rebellion after rebellion, martyr after martyr. The party would never survive long term." Winston nodded, but he still didn't really understand what O'Brien was trying to tell him. "That's why you are here," O'Brien continued. "You are going to die. You can't avoid it. You will not be saved. But it's very important that you die truly believing in the party. You will not be a martyr, Winston. People in the future won't know your name. They won't think you are a hero who tried to save the Brotherhood. By the time you finally die, you will truly love Big Brother and the party. That's the point of everything we are doing here. Even the men in that photo you think you remember died loving Big Brother. They begged to be shot in the head while their minds were still good and pure. Stronger and better men than you have been cured of their insanity. You aren't special. You won't be able to save yourself. By the time we are finished, you won't exist. You'll just be an empty body. You won't feel passion. You won't feel friendship. You won't feel joy. You won't feel courage. You won't feel anything at all, except what we tell you to feel. O'Brien waved over a doctor in a white coat. He was holding 2 metal paddles. Each one was covered with a slightly damp cloth. He placed the paddles on either side of Winston's head, one on each temple. Winston started to breathe harder. Panic was welling up inside him. It was another electric shock, but this time directly to his brain. "It's okay," O'Brien said calmly. "This time it won't hurt. 3,000. It didn't hurt. It was like being hit in the head with a baseball bat, but somehow painless. He was just stunned. His mind was sluggish and confused. He felt like he was floating. "Let's try a couple of questions," O'Brien said. "Who is Oceania at war with?" "East Asia?" Winston slurred. "For as long as you can remember, who has Oceania been at war with?" O'Brien asked. "East Asia," Winston said. O'Brien held up 4 fingers. "I'm holding up 5 fingers right now, aren't I?" O'Brien asked. "Yes," Winston said. "How many fingers?" 5, Winston said, meaning it. "You can always talk to me," O'Brien said, patting Winston's shoulder. "You can always tell me anything." Winston nodded. "Yes, I can tell O'Brien anything." "You can ask me some questions now if you'd like," O'Brien said. "Anything?" Winston asked. "Anything," O'Brien said. "What happened to Julia?" Winston asked. "She confessed," O'Brien said. "She betrayed you. She gave in faster than anyone I've ever seen." "You tortured her," Winston said. "And now her mind is clean," O'Brien said. "All her dirty, sexual thoughts are gone, all her lying, all her silliness. All of it is gone." "Is Big Brother a real person?" Winston asked. "Of course," O'Brien said. "I mean, is Big Brother a real person the same way you and I are real people?" Winston asked. "Like, does he have a body with arms and legs and a head? Does he exist the same way I exist?" "You don't exist," O'Brien said. "I think I exist," Winston said, exhausted. "You don't," O'Brien said, "but Big Brother does. Big Brother will always exist. Next question." "Does the Brotherhood exist?" Winston asked. "You will never know that," O'Brien said. "Even if you lived for 1,000 years, you'd never know." Winston had one more question. "What is room 101? O'Brien's face did not change. "You know what room 101 is," O'Brien said. "Everyone knows what room 101 is." O'Brien motioned for the doctor to come over. Another injection, then everything went black.